This is Fat to Fierce. Welcome to the Confidence Chronicles. I'm your host, Amy English. Join me on this empowering adventure towards a healthier relationship with food, body, and self, one delicious bite at a time. Hello there. Welcome to Fat to Fierce. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about the 3 eating habits because there are 3 specific types of eating habits that I talk about and that I focus on in coaching. And it's important and helpful to distinguish between them. They are overeating, emotional eating, and binge eating. And yes, I'm an emotional eating coach, but my clients typically struggle with one or all of these specific behaviors. And the reason it's important, I think, and helpful to talk about each of these and distinguish between them is because they're all common, but they're not the same. Now, there is some overlap between them, and you'll see that as I start talking about them in a little bit more depth here. But each of these habits has its own specific characteristics. And so when you're on a path to change your eating habits, to have a healthier relationship with food, and to overcome emotional eating or overeating or binge eating, it is really helpful to understand which one is typically happening the most in your world, which one you tend to struggle with the most. Because my clients come to me in different phases of their journeys. You know, some people will start working with me when they are fully in the binge eating mode. They are still binge eating and that's kind of where they're at. Others, it's emotional eating. Some, it's overeating. They've really conquered the binge eating. They don't do that anymore, but they still struggle with emotional eating and overeating, you know, and that's where they will fall off the rails, so to speak, and then have a hard time getting back into their groove. So that's why I like to explain and talk about each one of these as their own specific topic. So here we go. All right, I'm going to start with overeating today. So what is overeating? Overeating is eating too much. It's eating past the point of physical satisfaction. So it's eating more food than your body physically needs at that moment. Now, this, as you can imagine, is very common. I mean, all 3 of these are common: overeating, emotional eating, and binge eating. I mean, millions of people struggle with food and struggle with all 3 of these. But overeating, that's my guess would be that the majority of people probably fall into this category because it is so common to overeat, because we've never been taught how to listen to our bodies, to understand the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger, to tune into the signals, to know what it feels like as we're starting to fuel our body, as we're starting to eat. I often share with my clients to think about their body as a gas tank. And there's a gauge when you're starting to eat, when you're starting to fill up, of really noticing when you're getting to that point where you're satisfied and you're not completely full or stuffed. And because we've never been taught this, we just don't know how to do it. So a lot of times we keep eating until past that point, until we're full, until we get stuffed, because that's what we're used to doing. And it's easy to do, especially when we're not paying attention to our body, when we're only paying attention to our minds. And we're like, ooh, this food is so good. I just want a little bit more. It's especially easy to overeat when we're out at restaurants or when we order takeout, because most restaurants still have huge portions, more than we actually need in a meal. And so that becomes the norm, to overeat. And when I think back, especially before we had kids, when my husband and I, our first 8 years of marriage, we ordered out a lot. We ate out at restaurants a lot. At the time we were both in corporate, we both had really long commutes. And the last thing we wanted to do when we got home was make dinner. So we would stop, we would grab something on the way home, or we'd meet up at a restaurant for dinner. That was our norm. And because of that, we ate a lot. I ate a lot. And I can remember some of my favorite restaurants and eating to the point that I was so full, it hurt. Like that kind of full, that stuffed, where you have to unbutton the pants on the way home because it hurts. I know. I've been there. And I like to call that's the Thanksgiving stuffed, right? That's the Thanksgiving full. Doesn't feel good. And it wasn't until our daughter was born in 2008 that we decided to cut back on the restaurants and start a regular weekly grocery shopping trip. And I'm happy to report we've maintained that for the last almost 16 years. Wasn't easy in the beginning. We were so used to the quick grab a bite to eat, grab some takeout. But I will tell you, it is so much easier now that we're in a routine and that we pick up our groceries every week. I mean, thank goodness for grocery pickup. We pick up our groceries every week. It's super easy. It's better for our bodies, and it's a lot better on the wallet too. It's not cheap to eat out all the time. It adds up. And so not only adds up cost-wise, but it adds up in our bodies too. Okay, so back to overeating. So as I mentioned, a lot of times we want to overeat because it tastes so good. This food is so good. I recently had a client ask me, how do you stop yourself when you're at a restaurant and you're eating one of your favorite meals and it just tastes so good, but you're full? And my response to her was, check in. Ask yourself, when you're physically full, like you're satisfied, not even full, because there's a point of satisfaction that happens before you're full. And so when you are aware and you're at that point of satisfaction and you want to keep eating to the point where you would overeat, ask yourself with compassion, okay, without judgment here, very important, with compassion and curiosity, why do I want to keep eating even though I'm satisfied? What is this food representing in the moment? What is it giving me? What kind of feeling am I getting from this? Like if it's fun or if it's FOMO, like the fear of missing out because, you're at a restaurant and this isn't something you would normally make for yourself. Can you have it again? Could you come back another time? Or if it is about fun, what else is fun? What else could be fun that doesn't involve overeating? These are just some interesting questions you can start to ask yourself when you're checking in, when you're noticing that you are at that point of satisfaction, but you want to keep eating. Like, what's going on in the moment that you want to keep putting food into your body? It's very interesting when you start to notice the answers that come out of you. And because there is joy in overeating, and I get it, sometimes things just taste delicious. Here's the deal. When you ask those questions and you get curious with yourself, that's giving you a chance to pause. You're checking in, right? And then you get to make a conscious choice. Because listen, this is all about making a conscious choice in the moment of what you want to do. And if you're okay with continuing and overeating to the point of full or stuffed, then you made that choice. There's no need to beat yourself up afterwards. You see how this works? But here is the thing about overeating, about eating too much. It does come at a cost. It can absolutely derail us if we continuously overeat, especially if we want to remove extra weight. Overeating will impact weight loss goals. We all know this. But more importantly, overeating causes us to ignore our bodies because we're only paying attention to what the brain wants and what tastes good in the moment. And again, that's fine. Just pause long enough to check in and make a conscious choice. Knowing the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger is huge. And that is one of the main concepts that I cover in Fat to Fears. Okay, so that's overeating. Very common. Now we're going to talk about emotional eating. Okay, this is my specialty. I mean, again, you're going to see where this overlaps. It's all part of what I teach as a coach, but emotional eating is like that little something special. All right. What is emotional eating? Emotional eating is using food. It's the act of using food. It's the act of eating to avoid typically negative emotions. I like to say it like this. Emotional eating is using food to avoid negative emotions and enhance positive emotions. For example, eating to avoid the negative feeling of stress and enhance the positive feeling of comfort or peace. Because stress eating is a form of emotional eating. And I say that because it is interesting. Well, I guess I never really considered stress eating emotional eating back in the day, like when I think back on it. But a lot of people don't realize that stress eating is a form of emotional eating. It absolutely is, because you're eating to get relief from the feeling of stress. So that's helpful to know. Another example, because this is also very common, eating to avoid feeling bored. Also a form of emotional eating. And so when we're eating to avoid the negative feeling of boredom, we're looking for entertainment. We're looking for something to fill that void. We're looking for something to do. And just for the record, boredom is part of life. This is what I tell my teenagers all the time when they tell me they're bored. Get used to it. If you can allow yourself to feel bored and not let it be a problem, you're not going to have to find things to fill that space. It's okay to be, sometimes we're bored. I mean, it's part of life, just like sometimes we're stressed. Feeling stress is a very normal human emotion. There are situations and circumstances that happen to us in our lives that cause stress. In certain situations, it would be weird if we didn't feel stress or if we didn't feel boredom. So the idea that we have to try to mask them with food, once you allow yourself to feel those emotions, you don't then have to turn to food to avoid them, to distract from them. Okay, that was a small rant. Let me continue. So, emotional eating. We are trying to avoid those emotions that don't feel great and then create an emotion that feels better. It's a buffer. It's a way to numb out and avoid. And oftentimes it's mindless. You just do it without thinking. you have a stressful day at work, you might find yourself wandering in the kitchen if you work from home, or wandering in the break room looking for the nearest vending machine, looking for that snack. Or if everybody that you work with is driving you nuts, it's like hand over the cookies and no one gets hurt type of moment. Or you kind of circle around that person's desk who typically has the drawer full of candy. I know, I've been there. I remember. Oftentimes, emotional eating is a habit that's been around for a really long time. With the dozens of women that I have helped over the years, I can tell you that the average age when emotional eating starts is typically between 8 and 13. That's the earliest memory my clients have of using food to soothe, of using food as comfort. It's, emotional eating is similar to alcohol. It's similar to drugs. It's just that food becomes the drug of choice, so to speak. And here's what's tricky about that. Well, here's what makes it a little bit more tricky. It's more socially acceptable. It's easier to get. I'm talking about food here. It's easier to do. I always joke that, nobody's going to have a major problem if you scarf down a bag of chips and a pack of Oreos at work. That's what I mean by socially acceptable. And on the other side, where it gets more challenging is because we need food to survive as humans. So when emotional eating is the habit, it's hard to avoid. You can't just get rid of it. You can't just clear it out of your house and say you're never going to eat again. You need to eat. We all do. And so that's where it can be a little tricky at times. As I mentioned, emotional eating is very common. And also, it's not always a problem. Here's why. Certain foods hold nostalgia. There's ties to family, there's ties to friends and culture, and sometimes we want that comfort food. A few years ago when my uncle passed away, I said to my husband, I'm going to have a comfort eat, and it's okay. And I did. I took myself to the store. I got some chocolate-covered strawberries and some buttercream frosting, and I had myself a comfort eat. Fully mindful, fully aware, my choice. Did not beat myself up after that one. It wasn't necessary. I made the choice. It was my decision. Now, that was very different than years prior to that, when I used to drive to the store on an almost daily basis and buy myself a mini birthday cake to eat. Now, that's a story that I'm going to share with you on another episode. But I was homesick. We had just moved to Connecticut. This was back in 2000, right after we got married, and I ate a lot of mini birthday cakes. Anyway, so my point in that was that, sometimes we do want comfort food, and that's fine. Emotional eating can become an issue when one or any of the following takes place. It's happening consistently, like daily or weekly, as I just mentioned back in 2000 with my little birthday cakes. It can also become an issue if you feel like you can't control it, like you are out of control. It can be an issue when you don't realize it's happening until it's over, like until you're sitting with the empty bag of chips and cookies and you're like, what just happened? Or as I had someone say, I don't know, I reached my hand into the bag to grab another piece of candy and it was gone. I mean, been there, done that. Another example of emotional eating becoming an issue is if it's interfering with your health goals. And I'm not just talking about weight loss. Because here, like with emotional eating, if you're stress eating, so if you're eating to avoid stress and it's consistent and you feel like you're not in control and you don't realize what's happening until it's over, that's going to be interfering. That's going to be causing more stress. And then what's going to happen with more stress? Chances are you're going to continue to eat more. And so that becomes the cycle. And this is when it impacts your confidence because you feel like food is in charge and you have no control. That's emotional eating. And next, we're going to talk about binge eating. So, because again, now you may be seeing where some of this can overlap, right? Between overeating and emotional eating, because some emotional eating can turn into overeating. Some overeating can absolutely be emotional eating, but they each do have their own specific characteristics. There's enough of a difference that it makes sense to talk about them in their separate silos, but also understanding that they do overlap. And so this is where binge eating comes in. So binge eating, I'm going to talk about binge eating from my perspective, from my example, when I used to binge eat. It was more frantic than overeating and emotional eating. It was like next level eating. When I think about my history of binge eating, what comes to mind is like a hurricane or a tornado, like a storm. That's what it felt like. I was like a tornado or a cyclone in the kitchen, spiraling from the pantry to the fridge to the freezer and eating everything in my path. It did not matter. If I wasn't keeping certain foods in the house because I knew I couldn't control myself, I was eating stale saltine crackers. Like it didn't matter. I was eating plain bread. It didn't matter. I was eating whatever I could get my hands on. A lot of times when my kids were little, they'd go to bed and I would binge their little Teddy Graham cracker cookie thingies, straight from the box, just handfuls in my mouth. Binge eating is when you just can't stop. You just keep going. You keep eating at a very fast pace. Now, because stress eating was my common fix, that's, as I mentioned, I used to stress eat. That would often turn into a full-blown binge, that depending on the situation for which I was stress eating. When I was first diagnosed with breast cancer, a lot of those times turned into a binge. And in those moments, I would just keep stuffing food in my mouth. And sometimes it seemed like I barely took a breath. It was like I couldn't get the food in fast enough. And another difference between overeating and emotional eating and binge eating. So while overeating and emotional eating weren't always done alone, like sometimes, I'd overeat out to dinner with people, or I'd emotionally eat at work. Binge eating was always done in secret because I wanted no witnesses. Binge eating was the thing that I never talked about until I started healing my relationship with food. Now, present day, sometimes I do overeat. There are moments when I overeat, but it's rare. I can't tell you the last time I stuffed myself to the point of discomfort. That hasn't happened in a really long time. And that's because everything changed when I learned how to listen to my body and when I started appreciating my body. Because I didn't want to treat my body like a garbage disposal anymore. And as I mentioned, there are moments when I eat emotionally, like comfort eating when my uncle passed away a few years ago. But the difference is that it's a conscious choice. I'm fully in charge. I'm choosing to eat. And when we make a conscious decision, we don't beat ourselves up. And what was different about that time, so when my uncle passed and I had the chocolate covered strawberries and the frosting, it wasn't nearly the same quantity that I would have had in the past. Had a couple of strawberries with a little bit of frosting on them. Much different than what I would have done in the past. I probably would have kept going until eventually it turned into a binge. So it's just interesting to notice the difference when we're making a conscious choice that, yeah, I'm sad right now and I'm going to have a comfort eat. Another time that happened was my daughter had been hurt at a offsite event, and we received the phone call and she was in the ambulance waiting to go to the hospital. And luckily I got there in time, was able to ride in the ambulance with her. Long story short, she was fine. But when I came home that evening, I was like, I want to have something sweet. I want to comfort eat. And I did have something that night. Again, that was also a few years ago. The times that it happens are so few and far between. But again, it's making that conscious choice as opposed to just mindlessly eating without even thinking about it. There's a huge difference. Now, so there, like I said, there are times that I occasionally will overeat or occasionally will have an emotional eat, have some comfort food. Okay, not a problem. But binge eating, that is something that I completely stopped. My last binge was April of 2017, almost 7 years ago at the time of this recording. That's going to be another episode because I'm going to walk you through exactly what happened on that day and tell that story because it's helpful. It's helpful. So stay tuned. That's coming soon. But yeah, 7 years ago was my last binge. So, and I never thought that I'd be able to stop. I really thought that I was going to have to live with this forever. And it turns out that was not the case because you can heal your relationship with food and you can take back control. Okay, my points in sharing this today, I have a few. Number one, to know you're not alone if you're someone who struggles with food. Number two, to understand the difference between these eating habits so you can identify if you fit in one or all of them. And three, to realize that there is help if and when you're ready to change your eating habits, one or all of them. Because it is possible to have a healthy, balanced, peaceful relationship with food, and I would be honored to help you. Are you ready to take control of your eating, embrace your body, and boost your confidence? Then let's get fierce. Start your Fat to Fierce journey today. Go to amyenglishcc.com for more resources and to book your discovery call.